In the spring of 1991, 7 children walked into a Sunday school room on Easter morning. 20 minutes later, when the church choir sang the closing hymn, they were gone. No footprints, no broken windows, just an open side door and 7 empty chairs. For decades, the small town of Willow Creek lived with the unanswered question, how can children disappear in a house of God without a trace? But now, in 2025, during renovations to the old sanctuary, a sealed crawl space is found beneath the floor, and inside it, a weathered journal titled Our Last Lesson. What happened to those children wasn't a miracle. It was a plan. If you're drawn to long-form true crime stories with deep emotion, buried secrets, and chilling discoveries, subscribe now. April 7th, 1991. Location: St. Michael's Pentecostal Church, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The final chord of the Easter hymn hung in the air like incense, a moment of suspended stillness before the congregation rose to their feet. The sanctuary, filled with the soft shuffle of dress shoes and the rustle of pastel fabrics, seemed to glow in the filtered morning sun. Pastor Glenn Hardwell stepped away from the pulpit, voice still warm from his sermon. Children will return shortly. Let us bow our heads. Heads lowered, eyes closed. No one noticed the small wooden side door ajar, its latch broken clean. No one noticed the silence down the hallway. The Sunday school room, normally echoing with laughter and the clatter of crayons, sat still. 7 little chairs were tucked neatly beneath the coloring table. 7 open Bibles, 7 untouched juice boxes, and not a single child in sight. The first to sense something wrong was Ruth Ellen Kinnard, a mother of 3. She glanced toward the hall, lips still moving in prayer. Her eyes narrowed. The children should have been coming in by now. Her youngest, Molly, never missed communion. At 11:12 a.m., Ruth slipped out of the sanctuary and padded down the corridor, heels soft against the linoleum. When she opened the classroom door, she didn't scream. She simply stood there, frozen. A crayon rolled from the table and stopped at her foot. The air felt colder. Later, people would argue over the details. Whether the side door was found closed or open. Whether the hall lights were still on. Whether anyone heard footsteps on the gravel outside. But some facts were never disputed. 7 children were accounted for at 10:45 a.m. At 11:10 a.m., they were gone. No vehicles were seen leaving the gravel lot. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no bodies. The FBI arrived by nightfall. Search dogs, helicopters, roadblocks, nothing. By Monday morning, the media had descended. By Wednesday, the theories had begun. And by Sunday, 1 week later, the flowers on the altar had wilted. And no child had returned. 34 years later, when they opened the crawl space beneath the sanctuary floor during construction, they didn't expect to find anything, just rotted beams, old piping. But they found something else. A small canvas bag, a Sunday school workbook, and a child's notebook with a single phrase written over and over in shaky pencil. We were told not to scream. April 6th, 1991. Location: Willow Creek, North Carolina. The town of Willow Creek was quiet by design. It had never asked for attention, and in return, the world had mostly left it alone. On the Saturday before Easter, the sidewalks were swept clean, the gas station offered half-price car washes, and the local diner ran a hand-lettered special. Ham and grits, $3.25 with coffee. A plastic banner fluttered from the white picket fence around St. Michael's Pentecostal Church. The words, "He is risen," swayed in the breeze like a prophecy no one questioned. Children darted between parked cars, weaving around adults carrying grocery bags and fresh-cut lilies. The air was warming, the last cool threads of winter dissolving under the April sun. Yard signs invited the faithful to the sunrise service. Every porch seemed to display a pastel wreath or hand-painted wooden cross. To outsiders, it might have looked picturesque. But to those who lived here, Willow Creek was less about charm than control. The town was built on routines. Sunday mornings at St. Michael's, Wednesday prayer circles, high school football on Fridays. People rarely left. The same names filled the pews in the town council. Outsiders were noticed, outsiders were remembered, and anything that disrupted the delicate rhythm of life here was quietly, thoroughly pushed aside. That Saturday, no one suspected anything was wrong. Inside St. Michael's, the scent of floor polish mixed with lemon oil. The altar had been freshly scrubbed, the brass candlesticks gleamed, and the organist, Mrs. Dorothea Kane, rehearsed hymns alone, her arthritic hands moving with surprising grace across the keys. In the hallway just beyond the sanctuary, a row of Sunday school rooms stood ready, tables cleaned, coloring sheets stacked, chairs arranged in perfect semicircles. Classroom 2B, the largest of them all, had been decorated for the Easter lesson. Bright construction paper crosses lined the corkboard. A felt lamb on the wall wore a smile stitched by one of the church ladies. In the corner, a box labeled Bunny Hop Prizes was filled with plastic eggs and jelly beans. On the whiteboard, someone had written in neat script, Lesson, the stone rolled away scripture. Matthew 28, 1-7. Memory verse. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. It was simple, safe. A room meant for stories and songs and juice boxes. At 4:30 p.m., Miss Cora Mae Dennison, 67, never married, and head of the children's ministry for nearly 3 decades, checked the room one final time. She adjusted the hymn lyrics on the corkboard, straightened the stack of Bibles, and locked the supply closet. Everything was as it should be. She did not notice the small hairline crack forming in the corner of the classroom ceiling. She did not hear the soft metallic sound echoing from beneath the floorboards, and she did not see the dust shift near the old vent grill under the teacher's desk. Though, if she had looked closely, she might have noticed that someone, or something, had recently moved it from the inside. At the edge of town, just past the lumber yard and the old cotton mill that had shuttered 10 years earlier, Mark Kinnard stood in his driveway washing the family station wagon. His 3 children, Caleb, age 10, Molly, age 7, and Danny, age 5, were taking turns spraying each other with the garden hose while their mother, Ruth, called out half-hearted warnings from the porch. "Tomorrow's Easter," she said, laughing. "Don't drown your sister before church." Mark smiled, wiping his forehead with a towel. "They've been looking forward to that egg hunt all week." "Especially Molly," Ruth said. "She's been asking about the chocolate cross all day. I told her to earn it by learning her Bible verse. He is not here. He has risen," Molly shouted from the grass, beaming. "Just like he said." "Smart girl," Mark muttered, pride swelling in his chest. From the porch radio came the faint hum of a gospel station. The DJ was reading announcements, bake sales, a lost dog, a prayer request for a boy recovering from surgery in Asheville. Nothing out of place, nothing to warn them. At exactly 7:12 p.m., a stranger passed through town. A dark sedan. No plates. It rolled slowly down Main Street, stopping briefly at the blinking red light outside the church. No one was around to see it. The diner had closed early. The gas station was empty. The stranger watched the banner fluttering from the picket fence. "He is risen," then turned onto a gravel road and vanished behind the pine trees. Only one person saw the car that night. Thaddeus "Tad" Harmon, a retired janitor who lived alone in a trailer near the train tracks, glanced up from his lawn chair when the headlights flickered through the woods. He muttered something about outsiders with no manners and went back to his radio. The next morning, when investigators pulled hours of traffic footage, they found nothing. No record of the vehicle, no images, no trace. But Tad remembered, and when shown photos later, He would swear that what bothered him wasn't the car's speed or lack of license plates. It was the way it moved, he said, like it already knew where it was going. That night, 7 sets of Easter clothes were laid out neatly across 7 bedrooms. 1 pink dress with tiny lace trim, 2 clip-on bow ties, a vest still in its packaging, hair bows, patent leather shoes, a pair of white socks with embroidered yellow chicks. Parents tucked their children in with kisses and prayers. No one thought to lock the side door of the church. No one wondered about the vent grill beneath classroom 2B. And no one imagined that by noon the next day, 7 of those beds would remain empty for the next 34 years. April 7th, 1991. Location: St. Michael's Church, Willow Creek, North Carolina. Easter morning. The morning sun broke clean and golden across Willow Creek. Mist clung to the pasture edges, lifting in translucent ribbons as the air warmed. Birds sang with urgent joy from the pine branches, and the scent of cut grass and rising bread drifted from the town's kitchens. Easter Sunday had arrived, full of promise and perfection. By 7 a.m., the sanctuary doors of St. Michael's were unlocked, the wooden pews already dusted with sunrise. Volunteers bustled through the church corridors, arranging hymnals, laying out communion trays, and adjusting microphones. In the parking lot, folding signs welcomed visitors. Easter service, 10:30 a.m., all are welcome. Inside classroom 2B, sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the tables in soft amber. The lesson plan was neatly written on the whiteboard, the memory verse circled in pink. On each chair sat a printed handout with cheerful cartoon angels and a place for coloring. At 8:03 a.m., Miss Cora Mae Dennison arrived wearing her powder blue Easter suit, a brooch shaped like a dove fastened to her lapel. She walked the hallway with her usual humming, keys jangling from a crocheted wrist strap. She paused at the classroom door and took in a breath, pride swelling in her chest as it always did. Everything was just as she'd left it. The Bibles were stacked, the juice boxes chilled in the mini-fridge. 7 name tags were lined up on the table: Molly Kinnard, Leah Harmon, Jonah Riggs, Tommy Greer, Caleb Kinnard, Natalie Adams, Danny Kinnard. 7 children. The same 7 who had been in her class for months. She turned on the ceiling fan, opened the blinds halfway, and double-checked the candy eggs in the Bunny Hop prizes box. 1 bag was missing. She frowned, puzzled, then shrugged. She must have miscounted yesterday. She didn't notice the small vent grill beneath the teacher's desk had been shifted. Not removed, just disturbed. A faint film of dust outlined its edges, and when she turned off the hallway light and stepped into the sanctuary, she didn't see the shadow that lingered in the far corner of the classroom. Still and perfectly still. By 9:15 a.m., the church lot was nearly full. Families filed in wearing pastels and fresh haircuts. Little girls in flowered dresses tugged at tight shoes. Boys squirmed in ill-fitting collars. The choir, robed in white and purple, warmed up in the side room. Pastor Glenn Hardwell greeted congregants with practiced warmth, hands clasped over a well-worn Bible. Behind the sanctuary, the Sunday school rooms came to life. "Come on in, sweethearts," Cora Mae called as the children trickled down the hallway. "You know where your chairs are?" She ticked each name on her clipboard as they arrived, her sharp eyes darting from face to face. 7 children, 7 names, all present. She made a light joke about Jonah's clip-on tie and adjusted Natalie's crooked bow. Then she closed the door. Class began. The final memory most parents have of their children that morning is heartbreakingly ordinary. Molly Kinnard blew a kiss over her shoulder before disappearing into the hallway, her Easter bonnet too large for her head. Tommy Greer turned back for a last-minute hug. Jonah Riggs gave his father a thumbs up. Natalie Adams skipped ahead of her mother, blonde curls bouncing. And then they were gone. Into the hallway, into the room. into a moment suspended in time. Cora May's lesson began the same way it always did, with a song. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. 7 pairs of hands clapped. 7 voices sang. Then they sat at the table and opened their handouts. Cora May read the Easter story aloud from the Gospel of Matthew. She asked questions. The children giggled and answered. What happened when the women got to the tomb? The stone was rolled away. And who did they see? An angel. Do we know what the angel said? Natalie raised her hand. He said, Don't be scared. He's not here. He's risen. Very good, Natalie. The clock on the wall ticked gently. The air was warm, the room still. Cora May stood to grab the juice boxes. That's the last memory she would ever be able to recount clearly. At 10:31 a.m., the sanctuary lights dimmed. Pastor Glenn took the pulpit and nodded to the choir. The congregation stood. Somewhere behind the altar wall, the children were supposed to line up for the final hymn, a tradition every Easter, little voices joining big ones to close the service. But no footsteps came, no giggles, no whispers, no little faces peeking through the side door. The choir began singing without them. At 10:43 a.m., Ruth Kinnard nudged her husband. Where are they? He looked around. Maybe Cora's keeping them a few extra minutes. But at 10:50, the worry crept in. By 11:02, Ruth left the sanctuary quietly. The hallway was empty. She walked slowly, glancing into each classroom. When she reached room 2B, she turned the knob. It was unlocked. She opened it gently, and everything inside was still. 7 chairs, neatly pushed in, 7 open handouts, 1 juice box unopened. No children, no Cora May. And, Ruth would later say, a silence so unnatural it felt like it was pressing against her skin. She didn't scream, not at first. She stepped back and ran, first down the hall, then toward the sanctuary. The first to respond were the elders. Then the choir stopped singing mid-verse. Then Pastor Glenn fell silent. Then panic, like a wave breaking open the room. Parents surged forward. The classrooms were searched. Every closet, every cupboard, every restroom stall. No sign of the children. No sign of Miss Dennison. The back door, the one that opened to the gravel road behind the building, was open. The latch had snapped. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Outside, tire tracks led nowhere, just gravel, and then woods. At 11:39 a.m., someone dialed the sheriff. By 1 p.m., the parking lot was cordoned off with yellow tape. By 5 p.m., the FBI was notified. By nightfall, helicopters swept the surrounding forest. Dogs were brought in. Drones, heat sensors, bloodhounds. But no trail, no scent, no trace. Miss Cora May Dennison was found just after midnight, wandering barefoot along Route 12, 6 miles north of town. She was bleeding from one foot, her stockings torn, her blouse smeared with soil. When deputies stopped her, she couldn't speak. She was clutching a single object in her left hand, a crayon. Orange, worn down to the paper. She would never remember how it got there, and she would never remember what happened to the children. All she could say, over and over, was, they weren't supposed to leave the room. April 8th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The investigation begins by sunrise. Monday, Willow Creek was a town under siege, not by tanks or soldiers, but by fear. It moved like smoke through the streets, thickening in the spaces between words, tightening around throats. The pastel ribbons from Easter still clung to fences and porch railings, but their cheer now looked mocking, remnants of a celebration no one remembered how to feel. 7 children were gone. No sign of struggle, no noise, no witnesses, no ransom. Just 7 names echoing through the corridors of the church and the minds of their parents. And no answers. Sheriff Alvin Brandt had been in law enforcement for 27 years. He'd seen car wrecks, domestic standoffs, and the slow rot of meth-laced desperation that had crept into the county's farthest corners. But nothing had ever prepared him for this. He stood in the hallway outside classroom 2B, the scent of lemon oil still lingering like a cruel joke. A notepad hung loosely in his hand. He had written the names down 5 times already, as if repetition could anchor reality. Molly Kinnard, age 7. Danny Kinnard, age 5. Caleb Kinnard, age 10. Jonah Riggs, age 8. Leah Harmon, age 6. Tommy Greer, age 9. Natalie Adams, age 7. He whispered them under his breath, each name a weight. FBI agent Wallace Pritchard arrived that afternoon. Tall, narrow-eyed, and unsentimental. He brought with him a portable command station, a forensic van, and 2 agents trained in child abduction cases. They set up inside the church fellowship hall. By 3 p.m., the building was no longer sacred ground. It was a crime scene. Evidence markers littered the Sunday school room. 1 by each chair, 1 for the dropped crayon, 1 for the open workbook, 1 for the fridge full of untouched juice boxes. The back door latch had been snapped, not kicked or pried, but disengaged cleanly with precision. No fingerprints on the knob, no blood, no scuff marks on the door frame. Outside, tire tracks were useless, overrun by the stampede of rescue vehicles, volunteers, and media vans. "We're 2 hours behind the curve," Pritchard muttered. At this point, whoever took them could be 5 states away. Sheriff Brandt bristled. They didn't just vanish into thin air. Pritchard's gaze was unflinching. Sometimes they do. Miss Cora Mae Dennison was admitted to the county hospital under observation. Her feet were bruised and cut from the gravel, her blood pressure high, her demeanor shock-like. She flinched at every voice, every hallway echo. A psychiatrist was called in from Raleigh. Dr. Elaine Merrick, quiet-voiced and sharp-eyed, sat beside her in a dim room with drawn blinds. "Cora," she said gently, "can you tell me what happened yesterday?" Miss Dennison blinked. Her hands clutched a paper napkin so tightly it tore in ribbons. We were coloring." Her voice was raspy, dry. "They were sitting just there." Her hand gestured vaguely. "Then I turned to get the juice boxes. I didn't even hear a door." "You didn't see anyone?" No one." Dr. Merrick paused. "Do you remember walking out of the church?" "No." "Do you remember this?" She held up a small evidence bag containing the orange crayon. Miss Dennison's hand trembled. Her lip quivered. "I don't know how I got that." "Do you remember saying anything?" Cora Mae looked up, her eyes suddenly distant. "They weren't supposed to leave the room." She said it flatly, like reciting a verse. Then she began to cry, soft, dry sobs that came from a place far deeper than memory. By nightfall, search crews had covered a 2-mile radius around the church. Bloodhounds traced the back field, the creek, and the old cemetery across the gravel road. They picked up one scent, brief and disjointed, leading toward the tree line. Then nothing. The trail ended 10 yards in, as if the children had taken flight. "They were lifted out," said one searcher grimly, "like birds." Helicopters with infrared swept the forest canopy. Boats dragged the nearby retention pond. A dive team checked the well behind the church. No signs, no remains, no dropped shoe or scrap of clothing, not even a broken branch. That night, a town meeting was held in the high school gymnasium. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly. Parents, teachers, retired farmers, teenagers in Letterman jackets, the baker, the grocer, the mayor. Pastor Glenn Hardwell stood silently in the front row, eyes sunken. He hadn't left the church grounds since the children vanished. Sheriff Brandt took the podium. "We are doing everything in our power," he said. "This is now a federal investigation. If anyone saw anything unusual on Easter morning, even something small, you must come forward." Voices rose. Questions spiraled. Were they kidnapped? Was it someone from out of town? Why didn't the dogs pick up a full trail? Where's the teacher now? Why are kids? Agent Pritchard stepped forward, clearing his throat. We are pursuing all possibilities. No theory has been ruled out. But I will say this, whoever did this planned it. This wasn't random. It was fast. It was deliberate. It may have even been rehearsed. A murmur ran through the gym. Rehearsed. He let that word hang in the air. Whoever did this knew the layout of the building. They knew the door was weak. They knew how to isolate that room, and they left without a single child screaming loud enough to be heard. Silence followed. The town absorbed that fact like a wound. Pritchard continued, softer this time. We believe this individual, or individuals, may have had access to the church before Sunday, possibly in the weeks leading up to Easter. We're reviewing records, logs, volunteer schedules, maintenance reports. If you know of anyone who's been inside the church unsupervised, let us know immediately. Pastor Glenn raised a shaky hand. There's something, he said. All heads turned. I've found the vent grill. In classroom 2B. He swallowed hard. It was loose last month. I thought it was nothing. I tightened the screws. Thought a kid had kicked it. Sheriff Brandt frowned. Where does it lead? Under the building, crawl space. It's only about 2 feet tall. Any access from outside? Technically, yes. There's an old maintenance hatch around back. Been sealed for years. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. Let's open it. That night at 11:48 p.m., 2 agents and Sheriff Brandt pried open the old hatch behind the boiler room. A gust of earth-scented air wafted out, cool and stale. Flashlights swept the darkness. Dead leaves, spider webs, mouse droppings, broken boards. Nothing moved. But 20 feet in, they found it. A path. The ground had been flattened deliberately, hand-pressed. Tiny indentations in the dust, not footprints exactly, but signs of crawling, movement, back and forth. At the far end of the space, directly beneath classroom 2B, something glinted under the beam of a flashlight. A paper tag. It read, Caleb, Group A. Sheriff Brandt picked it up with gloved hands, his pulse quickening. It was from a Sunday school name tag, but the handwriting on it didn't match Miss Dennison's. April 9th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The crawl space. The morning fog had not yet lifted when Sheriff Brandt returned to St. Michael's with Agent Pritchard and a forensic technician in tow. The crawlspace hatch remained open, its black mouth yawning beneath the church like an exposed wound. Pritchard knelt beside the opening. He didn't say a word as he slid on gloves and clicked on his flashlight. The ground inside was dry, cold. The kind of stillness that made every noise, the creak of a beam, the rustle of breath, feel amplified. 20 feet in, he stopped. The flattened trail remained undisturbed since the night before. Just to the left, pressed into the compact earth, was something no one had noticed. A handprint. Small. A child's. But it wasn't fresh. It had been there for days, possibly weeks. Up above, in classroom 2B, the room had been stripped for evidence. Tables removed, rugs peeled up, floorboards dusted and lifted. What remained was skeletal. Drywall, exposed outlets, a faint stain from a juice box that had leaked and gone sticky in the night air. The vent beneath the teacher's desk was wide open now. From below, voices could be heard murmuring, "Bring the light over here." "There's something written." Sheriff Brandt leaned into the opening. "What is it?" The tech's voice came back, hushed. Numbers, etched into the joist beneath the floor, carved carefully into the wood with something sharp, were 3 rows of digits, 12-2-1, 13-1-314-3-2. Each row separated by dashes, no names, no labels, just numbers. Agent Pritchard took a photo. "They're not dates," he muttered. "Bible verses?" Brandt offered. "Maybe." But why carve them down here? A pause, then, or maybe they're assignments. Brant turned. Assignments. Groups, schedules, rotations. This looks like a system. That evening, while technicians vacuumed the crawl space inch by inch, the pastor's wife, Evelyn Hardwell, brought an old attendance book from the church office. She laid it open before Pritchard. "We used to keep everything by hand," she said, "before we had the computers. This one covers Sunday school rolls from 88 to 91. She tapped her finger along a page. "There," she said, "April 7th. All 7 children marked present by Cora." Pritchard stared at the initials beside each name, CM. And look at the months before that. Every Sunday, same names, same 7. Any other visitors? Substitutes? Number Cora's had that class for 3 years. She rarely misses. Pritchard flipped back further. January, December, November. The same names until 1. In early February, another name had been added, written in cramped block letters on the line below Jonah Riggs. A G-age unknown, address, parent contact. Then nothing, no check marks, no exit, just that one appearance, February 2nd. Pritchard looked up. Who is A.G.? Meanwhile, across town, the Kinnard household had descended into something between chaos and paralysis. Ruth Ellen sat at the kitchen table in the same dress she'd worn to church. Her hair was still pinned back, her eyes vacant. The house was full of casseroles and floral arrangements, but nothing felt comforting. It all felt performative, like people trying to pretend they weren't staring into a void. 3 of her children, gone, Molly, Danny, Caleb. She had tucked in all their shirts that morning, brushed their teeth, told them to be kind and patient. She had watched them disappear down the hallway. And then, nothing. Her husband, Clark, hovered in the doorway. He couldn't sit, couldn't speak. He just stared at the front door, as if expecting them to walk in at any moment. Later that evening, a call came into the sheriff's office from a nearby hardware store on Route 12. A clerk, tired-eyed and sweating behind the counter, said something had been bothering him since Easter morning. Guy came in Saturday night, just before closing. Said he needed screws, duct tape, plastic sheeting. Didn't think nothing of it. "What time?" asked Deputy Moser. "Right before we locked the doors. Said he was patching up a crawl space or something. I even joked about rats." He didn't laugh. "You remember what he looked like? Tall, sunglasses, real calm. Didn't look rushed. You get a name?" "No." "Security footage?" The clerk sighed. "Tape got reused. We only save it 3 days unless someone asks." Moser clenched his jaw. "Anything else?" The clerk paused. "Actually, yeah. He bought orange crayons." "What?" 2 boxes. The kind little kids use. We don't sell much of that brand. Just struck me as strange, next to all that other stuff." Back at the station, Pritchard sat in silence, reviewing the carved numbers again, along with the name tag recovered from beneath the floor. "Caleb, Group A." A theory had begun to take shape, half-formed, nauseating. What if the children hadn't been taken by force? What if they'd been lured? Separated, isolated, made to think it was a game, a drill, an Easter surprise? What if the person who took them had spent time with them before? That night, one final piece of evidence surfaced. In the trash bin outside the church boiler room, hidden beneath burned matches and twisted paper, was a candy egg wrapper. The wrapper was familiar. It matched the missing bag Cora May had puzzled over. Only this one had something different written on the inside fold. Faint, in red pen. Group B, next Sunday, April 10th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. A hidden histo. The morning of April 10th began in silence. The kind of silence that lingers like residue. After the sirens fade, after the cameras pack up, after the casseroles cool. The silence of a town suspended between disbelief and dread. 7 children, 3 days gone. And now a new message. Group B, next Sunday. It felt like a threat, or a promise. At the sheriff's office, Agent Pritchard spread the evidence on a folding table. The name tag, the candy wrapper, the carved numbers, the attendance book with the initials AG. None of it made complete sense, but a pattern was emerging. There were no fingerprints on the wrapper, only partial prints on the inside fold, but not enough to ID. It had been carefully handled, almost ritualistically. Sheriff Brandt paced behind him. "You think this was rehearsed?" "I think it was structured," Pritchard said. "Groups, labels, rules. Something was happening before Easter. Something these kids were part of, and we never knew." Brandt rubbed his temples. "And AG? I want a list of every child who ever attended that Sunday school in the last 5 years, Pritchard said. "Even if they only came once, especially if they only came once." That afternoon, Pastor Glenn Hardwell sat alone in the empty sanctuary. His hands trembled as he opened an old file drawer behind the altar. Inside, loose photos, pledge cards, notes from former congregants, and a locked box, metal, battered, labeled Archives, 1975 to 1986. He didn't remember locking it. The key was still on the same old ring, tucked in the drawer. When he opened the box, dust rose like breath. Inside were folders marked with dates, attendance rosters, baptism records, vacation Bible school sign-ins, and at the very bottom, a faded manila envelope with a handwritten label, "Dismissed Volunteer, 1982. He opened it. Inside, a single-page report. Name, Gideon Abel Doob, unknown volunteer. Role, Assistant Sunday School Helper, unpaid. Duration of service, 4 weeks. Dismissed, April 25, 1982. Reason, breach of conduct. Unauthorized time alone with children during lesson preparation. Notes, no criminal charges filed. Incident not reported to authorities at family request. Parents transferred their children to alternate congregation. Volunteer asked not to return. Keys retrieved." Beneath the paper was a photo, Polaroid, washed out, slightly creased. A man, perhaps mid-30s, wire-rimmed glasses, a conservative haircut, standing near the church playground, smiling almost blandly. But there was something off about the eyes. Back at the command center, Pritchard placed the photo beside the initials AG. "Abel Gideon?" Brandt asked. "Possibly. We know some offenders reverse their names when re-entering places they were banned from. Avoid detection. Start over." "He would have had to come back as a child," Brandt said. The initials were listed as a student. Pritchard tapped the attendance sheet. "Or someone posing as a child. Someone who filled out the form by hand. No one cross-checked it. No signature. No contact info. Cora May had dozens of kids every month. Could have easily slipped in for a week or two." He paused, long enough to observe, to test access, to make contact. At 5:40 p.m., a call came in from the Harmon residence. Tad Harmon, grandfather of Leah Harmon, one of the missing children, had gone into the attic for the first time since the disappearance. He'd been looking for old photographs. What he found was a box of Leah's drawings, stored haphazardly in a paper bag. Most were innocent. Trees, stick figures, houses. But one stood out. A picture of a room, not her bedroom. Something else. A square room with no windows. Just walls, a low ceiling, a single light bulb overhead. 7 figures inside, small, childlike, each one marked with a red A on their shirt. Outside the room, through what looked like a vent, a pair of eyes stared in. The drawing was labeled, "Group A, Sunday Place." Pritchard stared at the crayon lines, breath slow. "Do you think she saw this?" Brandt asked. "Before they disappeared?" Pritchard didn't answer, because something else was bothering him. The perspective of the eyes, the angle of the drawing. It wasn't someone watching the room, it was drawn from inside. That night, Ruth Kinnard finally spoke. She hadn't left the house since the morning her children vanished. Hadn't showered, hadn't eaten, just moved between rooms like a woman underwater. But at 9:17 p.m., she walked into the sheriff's station in the same floral dress she'd worn on Easter. "I found something," she whispered. She held out a cassette tape. "It was in Caleb's room," she said, "taped under the bottom drawer. I don't know when he recorded it." Sheriff Brandt took it carefully. On the label, written in a child's hand, "Classroom game, don't tell." April 11th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The tape. The cassette was old, scuffed, a standard 60-minute Memorex with fading ink on the label. No case, just adhesive residue on one edge where it had been taped, likely for months, maybe longer. Agent Pritchard stood at the audio lab counter inside the sheriff's station, arms folded tightly across his chest. He watched the technician press the tape into the deck. The machine clicked, and the spools began to turn. A hiss of static, then the soft whir of ambient noise. At first it was nothing. Then, a chair scraping, a soft giggle, a voice, small, male, young. "Okay, I'm turning it on now, but only for a minute." Pritchard's brow furrowed. That was Caleb Kinnard. His voice was clear, direct. "Not afraid. We're in the quiet room, that's what he calls it. We're not supposed to talk, but I wanted to record it because Danny says he heard the real name of the game yesterday." The sound of someone breathing heavily in the background. A shuffling of feet, like children sitting cross-legged. "It's not Group A like we thought. It's Group After. After what, I don't know." A pause. Someone whispers, "Shh, he's coming." Silence. Then a low hum. Mechanical. Not threatening, but deliberate. Footsteps. Not heavy boots, but shoes with rubber soles. Slow. Pacing. Then a man's voice, filtered through distance, but crisp enough to make out. "Who's ready for the next part?" Pritchard froze. The voice was calm. Software measured. Not rushed, not aggressive, almost soothing. "Remember, we stay in our groups. What happens next depends on how well you listen. No talking, no peeking," another child murmured. Caleb again. "He has a book, with all our names, and letters next to them. Mine says A, Natalie's says B." Static crackled, followed by a strange noise, like chalk on metal, a rhythmic scratching. Then the man again. "Let's go over the rules. Rule 1, no one leaves the room until called. Rule 2, if you hear the bell, eyes down. Rule 3, the tape warbled. If someone breaks a rule, they go to the other place." Then silence. For 28 seconds, nothing but the soft hum of fluorescent lighting. Until Caleb whispered one last time, "I think he used to be a teacher. He says we'll see the other room on the last Sunday." Click. The tape ended. Sheriff Brandt hadn't moved the entire time. His face was ashen. He finally spoke. "That doesn't sound like a man threatening kids." "No," Pritchard said. "It sounds like someone who thinks this is normal." He stood still for a moment, then added softly, "And someone who's done it before." By noon, Pritchard had the tape digitized and run through spectral audio analysis. There were no background voices beyond the children. No identifiable accent on the man's speech, but there was a faint echo in the acoustics. It didn't match classroom 2B. Too tight, too confined. "Basement?" Brandt asked. "Too small," said the technician. "More like a box, insulated." Pritchard's eyes narrowed. "Or a crawl space." Meanwhile, Pastor Glenn returned to the archived box and dug deeper. Beneath faded directories and ink-stained rosters was a weathered blueprint of the church, drawn up in 1958. He spread it out on the sanctuary floor. The structure was simple: a sanctuary, a classroom wing, the fellowship hall. But something caught his eye: a square labeled Storage Sub-Level B. It didn't appear on any modern map. No door, no stairs, just a sealed compartment beneath the north wing. Pastor Glenn paled. That wing had been closed off for repairs in the 1970s. The hallway bricked over. No one used it anymore. No one except... His mind raced back. Gideon Abel. April 1982. That volunteer had cleaned that wing, helped with drywall, had a key. He called Sheriff Brandt immediately. At 3:20 p.m., crews broke through the drywall at the end of the north corridor behind the sanctuary. Dust choked the air. Behind it, a sealed door, metal, rusting. No handle. Pritchard's voice was low. "Cut it open." With a saw and pry bar, they peeled the door back. The hinges shrieked. The smell hit them first. Dust, mildew, and something older. Something sealed for decades. The room was small, 8 by 8, insulated with foam board and plywood. No windows, a single bulb overhead. Wiring that no longer connected to anything. On the far wall, a board with pegs. 7 pegs. 6 still had items hanging. A shoelace, a sock, a string bracelet, a faded ribbon, a paper name tag, a red plastic bead necklace. The 7th peg was empty. Sheriff Brandt's voice cracked. "These are the kids' things." Pritchard nodded. He pointed to the wall above the pegs, etched faintly in crayon. Group A, last Sunday, and in the corner of the room, taped to the baseboard, was another cassette, unlabeled. Next to it, drawn in chalk, was a circle. Inside it, the letter B. April 12th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The second tape. The second cassette was heavier, the kind of weight that suggested it had been played many times, or not at all. Agent Pritchard stared at it under the forensic lamp. No label, no fingerprints, just the faint indent of something once written and scratched out. He turned it over. Something rattled inside. Sheriff Brandt stood just behind him, silent. They didn't play it in the sheriff's office this time. They took it to the FBI field station in Charlotte, 3 hours east, where federal audio engineers were already waiting. It took 10 minutes to stabilize the tape. The ribbon had degraded in parts, warped by moisture and time, but they salvaged enough. The first 30 seconds were silence, then a tone, high-pitched, synthetic, deliberate, then a voice. Not the same as the man from the first tape. This one was deeper, older, gravel-throated, like a sermon spoken after decades of smoke and ruin. Group B begins now, the voice echoed slightly, as if recorded in a metal box or under piping. The acoustics were wrong for a classroom or basement, but it wasn't outside either. It was somewhere sealed, purpose-built. "We have waited. You are special. You were chosen, not taken. You are being prepared." A faint scratching followed. Then a child's voice, barely audible. "I want to go home." "Home is later," the man said. "First, we listen." A rhythmic tapping began. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3. Then the voice again. "You are now Group B. Group A has passed. You must do better." Pritchard stopped the tape. His jaw clenched. He pressed rewind. "Group A has passed." He looked to the technician. "Play it again, slowly." They looped that portion. Passed, not released, not transferred, passed, as in finished, as in gone. Sheriff Brandt stepped away, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. "Jesus." Pritchard leaned in close to the speaker. On the loop's final pass, he heard something in the background that hadn't been clear before. Not words. A child humming. Software wavering. A familiar melody. He turned to the technician. "Can you isolate that humming? Get me just that segment?" 5 minutes later, it played again, filtered and focused. Pritchard recognized it immediately. "Jesus loves me," but off-key. Slowed down. Broken. Almost like the child had forgotten the tune halfway through. They played the rest of the tape. At the 15-minute mark, a series of clicks began, metal against metal. Possibly a latch. Then came the voice again. We learn through silence. We listen to the echoes. What is told once must be remembered. Then, a riddle. 7 stood, 7 fell. The room was full, the room is well. One by one they gave their song, but only silence makes you strong. Silence. Then crying. 2 children, possibly more. A scraping, a thud. Then the voice again, calm, measured. Rule 3, no crying. If you cry, the lights go. Seconds later, darkness. Confirmed by the tape's pitch shift, the slight feedback warble of the power source. Then a single child whispering, I can't see. Then nothing. Agent Pritchard sat motionless, a hand to his mouth. This wasn't just ritual or cruelty. This was programming, a system, a doctrine. These weren't random acts. They were rehearsals. Back in Willow Creek, Evelyn Hardwell stood at the pulpit, alone. She hadn't attended service since Easter Sunday. She avoided the sanctuary, avoided the mirror, avoided the sounds of children at the grocery store. But she returned that morning to pray. She moved quietly past the bricked-up hallway, past the flower arrangements now wilted with neglect, and into the pastor's office. There, she pulled a book from the shelf, an old hymnal used during children's choir in the 1970s. Inside, she found what she was looking for. A folded sheet of paper tucked between pages. Typed, with a heading, Order of Instruction for Group A, B, C. No author, no church logo, just steps. Simple, clinical, terrifying. Order of Instruction. Assemble children by personality type. Isolate by trust score. Assign to groups with distinct identifiers. Use music and scripture to reinforce obedience. Implement quiet room techniques no later than week 3. Schedule transfer or conclusion by end of cycle. Repetition equals belief. Evelyn dropped the page. It floated to the floor. She stared at the open hymnal, the lyrics of Jesus Loves Me blurred by tears. This wasn't a program someone invented recently. This was older. This was something passed down. At 9:12 p.m., Agent Pritchard received a call from Quantico. They'd run Gideon Abel's name through a deep archive. Non-digital, newspaper clippings, and internal clergy files. A match surfaced, not from North Carolina, from Missouri. 1971. A small-town pastor removed quietly after allegations involving a children's Bible camp. No charges filed, just a quiet transfer, a sealed settlement. A photograph showed the same man, slightly younger, same glasses. Pritchard read the name, Abel Gideon Lowry. Not 2 first names, a full name, a man with a history of infiltrating churches, working with children, and leaving behind rumors that never made it into courtrooms. He wasn't a ghost. He was a pattern. And suddenly, the name from the attendance sheet made sense. AG hadn't been a child. He was testing access. One last check before the final act, and they'd let him walk right through the door. April 13th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. A mother remembers. Ruth Kinnard hadn't slept in 3 days. Not fully. Just moments of half-conscious drifting, flashes of her son's face in shadows, the sound of a crayon dropping, her own voice whispering his name in the dark. She refused sedatives, refused visitors. She barely ate. But this morning she remembered something. It started with a dream. Caleb's voice whispering through a vent. Then she was back in the church hallway, alone again. But this time the door at the end was open. The dream ended with a smell. Dust and bleach. She stood barefoot on her porch in the cold morning air, staring out at the overgrown lawn. Pastor Glenn's truck pulled into the gravel driveway quietly. "I need to show you something," he said. They didn't speak on the way to the church. Inside, they passed the yellow tape and stepped carefully over exposed wiring and torn drywall. Construction crews had cleared out for the weekend, and the church was silent. Too silent. Glenn led her to the sanctuary, then down the side hallway toward the sealed-off north wing, past the classroom, and then to the spot beneath the altar. The crawlspace hatch. It had been disguised for decades as a baseboard access panel, but now it was open, revealing a narrow descent into darkness. A ladder had been installed for the search team. "We found the pegboard here," Glenn said, "and the tapes." Ruth didn't move at first. She just stared into the black. "I know this smell," she whispered. She stepped forward and began to descend. The room below wasn't large, but it was intentional. Foam insulation, a single overhead bulb, a fan vent leading to nowhere, the kind of space designed not just to hide, but to contain. Ruth moved to the far wall. Her eyes scanned the chalk marks, the symbols, and then she saw it. A small star drawn beside the final peg, and beneath it, faint but still visible in the dust, Caleb's initials. CK. She reached out and traced them with her fingers. Her voice broke. "He was here." At the same time, Agent Pritchard was across town at the local library archive, sifting through 40 years of microfilm. He'd learned to look for what wasn't printed. Event cancellations, missing photos, abrupt transfers, articles pulled midweek. He was searching for patterns. He found them in a forgotten Sunday bulletin from 1982. An Easter event had been abruptly canceled. A note in the margins, handwritten. Volunteer issue, suspend choir prep, move groups to alternate rooms. That was the week Gideon Abel was dismissed. Further down the page was a list of songs scheduled for the children's choir. One stood out. "Silence is the song." Not a known hymn. Not in any Baptist or Pentecostal hymnals. He found it again in a 1971 Missouri church bulletin, then again in an archived brochure from a Kansas Bible camp in 1965. 3 different states, same song title, same phrase. Silence is the song. This wasn't just a man. This was a methodology, a doctrine. Later that evening, Pritchard gathered the families in the fellowship hall. A circle of chairs, no cameras, just parents, siblings, grandparents, all hollow-eyed and trembling with grief that hadn't been given time to settle. He played a short excerpt of the second tape, the humming, the song. The moment it ended, Leah Harmon's grandmother stood up. "I've heard that," she said. "She used to hum it in the bath." Others nodded. "My son, too," whispered a mother. "I thought it was from school." Pritchard moved carefully. "That's not a school hymn. That's not a church hymn either. It's a teaching tool. It was used before, in other places, other disappearances." He looked around the room. "We're not just dealing with a kidnapping." He paused. "We're dealing with a cycle, a doctrine that's been passed down, perfected, tested." The room fell silent. Then Ruth spoke, her voice steady for the first time in days. "Then we find the man who started it." That night, Evelyn Hardwell returned to the hymnal in the pastor's office. She flipped past the order of instruction, searching the back pages. Tucked behind the final blank sheet was something strange. A child's drawing, crayons, faded, likely decades old. 7 figures in a row, all wearing blindfolds. Above them, a face, distorted. No features, just lines. Hair, a robe, and scrawled at the bottom, "He says we have to sing quiet. That's how we know we're good." Evelyn's hands shook, because written faintly in the corner, in red ink, was a name. Gideon. Across town, under flashlight, Agent Pritchard and Sheriff Brandt entered the old, condemned farmhouse listed under a property trust traced back to Lowry Gideon Holdings, a shell corporation tied to a now-defunct religious outreach program from the 1970s. The structure had long since been gutted, but the basement remained intact. In the center of the concrete floor, covered in dust and mold, was a rusted steel door, welded shut, and scratched into the surface. Group C, final room. April 14th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The final room. The rusted steel door groaned as the torch cut into its seams. Agent Pritchard stood just behind the welding team, watching smoke curl through the basement of the abandoned farmhouse. His flashlight beam trembled slightly, not from fear, but from tension that had been tightening across his chest for days. Sheriff Brandt wiped sweat from his brow, eyes fixed on the door as it finally cracked. They pried it open slowly. A burst of stale air poured out, musty, thick with rot and metal. The flashlight revealed a steep staircase descending into darkness. Old concrete, mold climbing the walls, a faint humming in the air, barely perceptible, like a dying generator still echoing from somewhere deep below. The first words painted on the wall in faded white: "Enter silently, no talking." They moved in together, Pritchard first, then Brandt, followed by two agents with floodlights and respirators. The stairs led down 20 feet before leveling into a narrow corridor. On either side were small doors, 6 in total, each barely large enough to crawl into. Steel vents bolted shut, soundproof foam lining the interiors. Holding rooms, identical, cold, numbered. At the end of the hallway stood a final door, larger, wood-framed, with a viewing window scratched and fogged over with age. It bore the mark they'd seen before. Group C, final room, and beneath it, crudely carved into the wood, "Where we learn to forget." Pritchard turned the knob slowly. The hinges shrieked, and inside was silence. The room had no furniture, no altar, no obvious signs of ritual, just a circular space with a chalk outline on the concrete floor, large enough for a group of children to sit cross-legged. On the wall, in peeling paint, "You will be loved again, if you obey." And beside it, a series of names, dozens of them, written in childish handwriting, some crossed out, some circled. 7 names at the bottom. The Willow Creek Seven, each one paired with a letter. Caleb, B. Natalie, C. Daniel, D. Molly, E. Jalen, F. Hope, G. Leah. Pritchard's heart pounded. They weren't just randomly taken. They were selected, categorized, prepared. Behind the wall, they found a false panel, and behind that, an old steel locker, padlocked and chained. They cut it open. Inside, 7 identical church uniforms, neatly folded. A photo album, empty except for one Polaroid. The 7 children standing in the sanctuary hallway, all facing away from the camera. And at the bottom, a reel-to-reel tape, labeled in blocky handwriting, "Final Conditioning, Group C." Back at the FBI mobile command van, Pritchard oversaw its playback. The voice was the same as before, calm, composed. "Group C, this is your final test. You will not remember the world above unless called." There were gaps of silence, then small voices, reciting phrases, over and over. "Silence is safe. He will return. Only the quiet are chosen. We are the last." It was a chant, a conditioning cycle, echoed with a metronome in the background. Then a child cried out, briefly, before being hushed. Then the voice again, "This is the end of instruction. You are ready." And the tape ended. Sheriff Brandt sat slumped in the passenger seat of his cruiser, stunned. They weren't just taken. They were brainwashed. Pritchard didn't respond. He was watching the final frame of the Polaroid again. The photo had been taken from inside the church. The angle was high, like from a rafter. The 7 children stood beneath a stained glass window. All their heads were turned, but behind them, just barely visible in the colored light, was a man, dressed in black, unrecognizable, but his height, stance, and outline matched someone from the past. Pritchard blew up the image on the screen. Brant leaned in. That can't be. But it was. Abel Gideon Lowry. Years older than the last confirmed photo, but unmistakable. He had stood in the church that morning, not hiding, watching. That evening, Pastor Glenn pulled out the final ledger from the church archives, a donation record from 1985. One name stood out: C. Abel, recurring monthly donations made to the New Silence Mission. No address, no explanation. The mission had long been shut down, but Evelyn Hardwell remembered the name. She'd seen it once on a flyer inside a traveling revival tent outside Fayetteville in the 1970s. She remembered the slogan, "Let the little ones lead when they are made quiet." She whispered aloud, "How many churches did he reach?" Pritchard called Washington. He told them, this wasn't a case of missing children. It was part of a network, decades old, mobile, evangelical in language, but rooted in psychological conditioning and isolation. And now, possibly reactivating. Because when he cross-referenced the 7 names on the wall in the final room, 2 more matched recent cold cases in other states, different towns, different dates, same method, same silence, same pattern. And somewhere, in a town not far from Willow Creek, a new congregation was gathering. A smiling man in a pressed suit stepped onto a small pulpit beneath a white tent. He opened a worn Bible and said softly, "Let us pray for the little ones. They hear better than we do." And in the front row sat 7 children, eyes down, hands folded, silent. April 16th, 1991. Location: Willow Creek, North Carolina. The names that weren't there, by Tuesday morning, the press had caught up. Helicopters hovered. Reporters swarmed. Rumors spread like wildfire. Cult activity, child trafficking rings, underground bunkers beneath churches. Families were hounded, parishioners interrogated, and the once quiet town of Willow Creek became a national headline. But inside the FBI's temporary field office, Agent Pritchard was focused on something else, a detail no one else had questioned. The names. The 7 names on the wall in the final room, A through G. But the Sunday school roster from April 7th, 1991, had 9 children present that day. 2 names were missing from the bunker list. Isaac Taylor, age 6, Madeline Reese, age 5. Both families had been adamant from day one. Their children were present in the classroom that morning. Both disappeared alongside the others. Yet their names hadn't been written on the wall. Their uniforms weren't found in the steel locker. Their voices weren't on the tape. Pritchard stared at the board. His marker hovered. 7 documented. 2 absent. He circled the question. Where were Isaac and Madeline? Down the hall, Ruth Kinnard was reviewing the old church bulletins again when Evelyn Hardwell brought in something new. It was an envelope, yellowed and frayed, discovered between the pages of an unused teacher's guidebook for the 1991 Easter lesson. No stamp, no postmark. Just a single word written on the front: spare. Inside was a single Polaroid, a photo of a stairwell, cracked tiles, a child's shoe in the corner, and written on the back, only 7 were needed. The rest go back. Ruth dropped it. Her breath caught in her throat. Go back? Had 2 children been returned? If so, where? When? Why hadn't anyone come forward? That afternoon, Pritchard requested a re-sweep of the church property line, specifically along the wooded creek bed behind the cemetery. They'd searched there once, days ago, when dogs had lost a scent in the brush. This time they searched deeper. At 3:42 p.m., cadaver dogs stopped near a collapsed section of fence behind the creek, beneath a fallen tree. Beneath it, loose, dark earth. The team began to dig. 2 hours later, they found a buried crate. Wooden, sealed with nails. Small. Inside, 2 sets of bones, children, wrapped in church choir robes, a child's Bible clutched in one skeletal hand. The medical examiner would later confirm it. Isaac Taylor and Madeline Reese returned, but not alive. Not since the first day. Back at the church, Evelyn took Pritchard aside. "There's something else," she said. "Something I never told Glenn, never told anyone." She reached into her purse and handed him a small cassette. A home-recorded tape labeled Easter Rehearsal, March 1991. "My husband recorded every children's choir rehearsal. He was proud of them." Pritchard inserted the tape into a portable player. The audio crackled. Children laughing, shuffling feet, a piano chord, then a voice. Not Pastor Glenn's. A different man, measured, gentle, with a slight rasp. "Remember, if you want to sing on Easter Sunday, you must pass the quiet test." Children giggled nervously. One asked, "What's the quiet test?" The man chuckled. Silence under pressure, stillness in the dark, listening without speaking. "Obedience." Another child asked, "Why?" His voice turned soft. "Because silence is how we hear his voice." Pritchard froze the tape, rewound it, played it again. The voice matched the second reel to reel tape. The same cadence, same inflections. It wasn't Pastor Glenn. It was Gideon Abel Lowry. He'd been rehearsing the children, not just for music, for obedience. Later that night, Pritchard reviewed the original class photos from 1991. All children lined up for Easter week. In the very back, partially obscured, was a man in a choir assistant robe. Young, gaunt, unfamiliar. He wasn't on staff, not in any church directory. But Ruth recognized him instantly. "That's the man who brought Caleb a coloring book," she whispered. "Said he was filling in for Sister Marion." Pritchard stared closer. The man's name tag had been folded under, but a few letters were visible. Dion. Abel Gideon. Sheriff Brandt walked into the office pale. "You need to see this." He dropped a folder on the table. It was a maintenance report from 1979. A leak under the sanctuary floor. A repair order was filed, then canceled. In the margin, a handwritten note. "Keep the access panel sealed. Not safe to open again." He said it's part of the design. Signed, G. Abel. This had never been about chance. This wasn't a single day's crime. It was a ritual repeated, perfected, and institutionalized over decades. Pritchard sat alone for a long time after everyone left. He played the final tape once more, not to analyze, just to listen. Near the end, after the chanting stopped, a child whispered one final sentence, almost inaudible beneath the tape hiss. "I still remember my name." And in that moment, Pritchard knew one of them might still be alive. April 17th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. One still remembers. The sun broke through the tree line just past 7 a.m., casting long beams across the side of the church. But inside the FBI field office, no one noticed the light. They were too deep into darkness. Agent Pritchard hadn't slept. The tape kept echoing in his mind. "I still remember my name." It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a sob. It was defiant, steady, a small voice pushing through years of conditioning, and it changed everything. If one of them remembered, then one of them might still be free. Not just alive, aware. He met with Ruth and the other families that morning. They gathered in the basement fellowship hall, chairs in a quiet circle, grief dulling into something sharper. Determination. Pritchard played the audio. "Let it run." He pointed to the final words. "You hear that?" he asked. Ruth nodded. "That's Caleb." The others looked at her, startled. "I know my son's voice," she said. "I don't care how many years it's been." Hope stirred, but it was cautious, fragile. Sheriff Brandt spoke up. "If one child resisted, there may be a trail. Somewhere he slipped out of the system. Maybe tried to reach someone." "We combed everything," one of the agents said. Hospitals, foster records, name changes. Nothing connects. Pritchard was silent. Then he said, "You're looking for children who forgot who they were. But what if we look for someone who never did?" At noon, they pulled the 1992 psychiatric intake logs from surrounding counties, cross-referenced with runaway reports. And that's when they found it. A boy, approximately 8 years old, found wandering the roadside in Orange County, North Carolina, in late May 1991, 2 months after the Willow Creek disappearance. Malnourished, dressed in a child's choir robe, refused to speak, would not answer to any name, no matching fingerprints. He had one possession, a folded paper star clutched in his hand. He was admitted to a state hospital under the name Starling Doe, transferred 3 times over the next decade, finally placed in a long-term psychiatric group home under a new identity. All records marked confidential. Pritchard got on the phone. 3 hours later, he and Ruth were in the car, driving east. Fields rolled by in silence. Ruth clutched the tape recorder in her lap. She hadn't cried, not since the dig. She refused. "If it's him," she said, "I want to be the one who says his name first." Pritchard nodded. They arrived at the facility, a converted farmhouse outside Durham. Quiet, peaceful. A counselor met them inside. "He doesn't speak much," she warned, "but he draws a lot." They walked down the hall. Room 4B. Ruth paused at the door. The counselor knocked gently, then opened it. Inside, a young man sat on the floor, surrounded by drawings, stars, circles, pegboards, and one recurring image, a church sanctuary with a small side door slightly ajar. He looked up, eyes wide, pale. Ruth stepped forward, voice trembling. "Caleb," she said. He stared. Then, slowly, his hand reached for a paper. He held it out to her. She took it. It was a drawing of 7 children standing in a line, each one with a letter over their heads, a through G, but one had a name written beneath it. C. Caleb. She dropped to her knees. Her hands reached for his. He didn't pull away. Then, in a broken whisper, "They told me I had to forget." She held him close. "You don't have to anymore." Back in Willow Creek, Evelyn was piecing together the final documents from the church archives. She found something wedged between the hymnals, a ledger entry from 1966. It was from a different church, different town, but the handwriting matched, and at the bottom, transferred choir discipline methodology from Group A, recommend continuation under new instruction, G. Abel Lowry. This went back decades. It wasn't just Willow Creek. It wasn't even North Carolina. It was everywhere. Pritchard returned with Caleb that evening. The boy, now nearly grown, had barely spoken since leaving the facility. But when they pulled into the church parking lot, he reached for the door handle before the car stopped. He stood in front of the building, silent. Then he pointed. "To the left," he said. "That's where the real room is." Everyone froze. "What do you mean?" Ruth asked. He looked at her. "You found the teaching room," he whispered, "but not the quiet room." Flashlights came out. The construction team followed Caleb's finger to the east wing, to a side hallway no longer in use. Behind the drywall, behind old boards, they found a second access hatch. Beneath it, another staircase. Not on the blueprints, deeper than the first. Inside, 7 soundproof booths, each with a speaker, a vent, a light. And in the center, a viewing platform, one-way glass pointed down. They were being watched. They had always been watched. And in the far corner, another locker. Inside it, dozens of tapes, all labeled. Group A, Group B, Group C, and 3 more, Group D, Initiation Group D, Isolation Group D, Final Conditioning, Group D had begun, which meant they were still out there. April 18th, 1991. Location, Willow Creek, North Carolina. The last tape. The room smelled of dust and wires. Agent Pritchard stood at the back of the sanctuary, watching as the final tape was loaded into the reel-to-reel machine. The player had been cleaned, prepped, tested. He didn't breathe as the reels began to spin. The label on this one was different. Group D, Final Conditioning. Master Cut. Sheriff Brandt stood beside him, arms crossed. Ruth sat on the front pew, clutching her son's hand. Caleb hadn't let go of her since they returned. The audio began with silence. Then, a voice. Not Gideon's. Softer, female, measured. Group D, you are special, the world above doesn't deserve you. There was the faint hum of a metronome in the background. Then a deep, rhythmic tone, designed to lull. When the bell rings, you will forget your name. When the light returns, you will remember your purpose. Children responded in quiet unison. We remember. We obey. We wait. The voice continued. Silence is the gift. Speech is the sin. One day he will speak through you, but only if you stay quiet long enough to listen. The audio paused, then began again, this time filled with childlike humming. A lullaby, not in English, just sounds, rhythmic, hypnotic. And then, the door in the back of the church creaked open. All heads turned. A man stepped inside, older, gray-bearded, thin. His hands were raised. I came to stop it, he said. Gasps filled the sanctuary. Ruth stood. Gideon? He nodded. His voice was tired, hollow. I walked away once, but they didn't. Others took it, used it, changed it. I didn't finish what I started. Brandt pulled his sidearm. Hands where I can see them. Gideon didn't resist. He walked to the altar and placed a small metal box on the table. The real tape, he said. Not the broadcast version. This one was never played. Because I couldn't. Pritchard stepped forward. Opened the box. Inside, a tape labeled Redemption Cut, Group C, and a note in shaking handwriting. This ends with you. Let them go. The redemption cut began softly. No voice, just the sounds of children breathing. Then, a child speaking. My name is Caleb. I remember my house. I remember my mom. Then another voice. I am Hope. I remember the color yellow. And another. Daniel. I remember wind. One by one, the 7 voices spoke. And then the female voice returned, not the instructor, but someone else. Gentle, warm. If you remember your name, they cannot keep you. Say it out loud. The children repeated their names, over and over. We are not Group C. We are not the quiet. We are real. The tape ended with a sound like wind chimes. Caleb stared at the machine as it clicked off. I do remember, he said softly. All of it. I just didn't know what was real. Ruth pulled him close. It's real now. Gideon was arrested without resistance. On the record, he confessed to organizing the early iterations of the program. Said it began as an obedience model in the late 60s, borrowed from missionary techniques. But somewhere along the way, it was hijacked, replicated, twisted. Others began creating their own groups, claiming children needed to be purified from the world. He said he tried to dismantle it. He failed, but he left breadcrumbs, tapes, journals, hoping someone would find them if the system ever activated again. I thought it died with me, he said. But evil never dies, Pritchard said. It waits. 3 weeks later, a coordinated multi-state raid was launched based on the data in Gideon's ledgers. 6 church properties, 4 independent ministries, 2 old orphanage compounds. In one of them, they found 5 children in soundproof rooms, eyes wide, hands folded, mouths closed, all under the banner of a nonprofit called New Silence Institute. It had been rebranded, hidden in plain sight, but now exposed. Caleb testified in a closed hearing. then vanished into a protected identity program. No one would see him again. But the morning he left something in the mailbox at St. Michael's. A single photograph, 7 hand-drawn stars, all different colors, and beneath them, we were told not to scream, but now we speak. April 7th, 2025. Location: Willow Creek, North Carolina. Rededication. Sunday. The church had been rebuilt mostly. New floorboards, new pews, a new sanctuary mural. But the shadow still lived there, behind the stained glass. Ruth sat in the front pew beside Pastor Glenn, older now, frail. She wore a sunflower pin. In her hand, she clutched a folded paper star. The service began with a reading from Psalms. Then, from the back of the church, came the sound of footsteps. Children entered. Local students, carrying candles, one for each of the Willow Creek Seven. As they reached the altar, the sanctuary filled with light. And in that silence, not one person bowed their head. They watched, and they remembered. Not just what was lost, but what was found.